Okay, well, let's hop back to the BBC and misinformation because it appears that the BBC's own Marianna Spring is getting very excited because she's apparently prompted a panorama which is all about disaster trolls. So this is part of the big headline on the BBC: UK terror survivors tracked down by disaster trolls. And starts off with saying conspiracy theorists who claim UK terror attacks have been staged are tracking down survivors to their homes and workplaces to see if they're lying about their injuries. A BBC investigation has found Martin Hibbert, who was paralysed from the waist down when he and his daughter Eve were caught in the 2017 Manchester arena blast, told the BBC is now preparing to bring a libel action against a conspiracy theorist based in Wales. So if we get into this and see what Ms. Spring had to say, this is just some of the quotes from the article itself. For the past 5 months, I've been looking into conspiracy theorists who target UK terror survivors for BBC Panorama and a Radio 4 podcast. My investigations and new research, along with the testimony of those affected, show that conspiracy theories and tactics like those deployed by Mr. Hall, that's Richard D. Hall, are emblematic of a wider phenomenon that survivors and bereaved families are experiencing. She continues, a victim of the 2017 Westminster Bridge terror attack who has been harassed by online conspiracy trolls told the BBC that surviving a terror attack now seems to inevitably lead to being abused. These types of conspiracy theories and the abuse they inspire echo those of Alex Jones. So I don't think we should be very surprised at what Marianna Spring has done there to conflate it with Alex Jones. The US host of the conspiracist show and website InfoWars, who this month was ordered to pay nearly $1 billion to families of the US Sandy Hook school shooting after falsely claiming the 2012 attack was a hoax. I'm just going to put in here that Ms. Spring is not going to conduct any investigations in any of the claims made by the UK government and authorities over the Manchester attack. Anything the government says is taken, as being true by Marianna Spring, and I think we see some of the weaknesses here. But in this article, I want to introduce this particular lady because all of a sudden BBC monitoring comes in, and this is what the BBC said. Research from BBC monitoring found that dozens of videos promoting false claims about the Manchester attack, accumulating more than 300,000 views, were still on YouTube 5 years after the incident. After the BBC flagged this to YouTube, the company removed Mr. Hall's channel and one other that had promoted his content. So now we see the organisation BBC Monitoring, under the directorship of Liz Howell, coming in, is doing what, Mike? Spying on people in Britain? It certainly seems so. So if you're not sure what BBC Monitoring is, go and have a look on the BBC website. BBC Monitoring tracks, translates, analyses and summarises global media to help you make sense of world events. You're not capable of doing it yourself. You need these people to do it. And we can now add with certainty that BBC Monitoring is now also spying on the UK public. And if we want to know who's doing this, well, let's bring up the names that the BBC says. So we've got an Alistair Coleman and a Shayan Sardarizadeh, who we have mentioned before. But these are the two key people apparently looking at fake news, disinformation, and manipulation on digital platforms. Olga Robinson on the right there is doing the same in Russian media. But Shayan, we mentioned because we picked up a little while ago that he was busy putting out tweets and helping to inflame the situation in Iran, where there was the protest over the headscarves. So we picked up that he followed the UK column, and this was him declaring his work with BBC Monitoring and at BBC World. And here we put up a couple of tweets. This was back on the 26th of September, where this BBC employee is openly helping calls for regime change in Iran. So Mark, if I just ask you on this one, uh, you're there in the States. Many people in America think that the BBC is a glowing beacon of truth in the world. But here we see the BBC using its own people again to help inflame strife and trouble in foreign countries. If they're doing this, we can't trust them over their reports as to what's been happening in UK, surely.
Yeah, it's a total loss of distrust in the BBC. There's so many ways you could go with this. Over here, Elon Musk no sooner became owner of Twitter than he's already being accused of being someone who aids and abets conspiracy theories over the alleged invasion of the Pelosi home. Paul Pelosi, the husband of the U.S. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. And so the whole conspiracy theory meme is being attacked. In other words, it's as if there can be no such thing as a conspiracy at all. Now, in what Marianna Spring is talking about, one thing that occurred to me is they talk about all sorts of trolls, most of whom are anonymous. For all we know, and it's entirely conceivable, a lot of the trolls might be exaggerating things and claiming things that aren't technically true, and casting too wide of a net so as to discredit those who might have more legitimate conspiracy insights. So I'm sure Marianna Spring is not going to take those sorts of subterranean things into account. She looks to me quite young and naive, if I may say. Real reporting, you have to withhold your opinion and you have to look at all the angles and all the different possibilities. You can't make these calls or make these assessments in, a couple of minutes or whatever in this high turnover, got to have it now news age that we're living in. We want it, we want it now. And so anyone who's trying to do independent analysis is just called a conspiracy theory. And then, like you said, conflating it with Alex Jones, who, quite honestly, is not going to pay $1 billion. I can almost say categorically that's not going to happen. That's a good headline. It's good, flash in the pan kind of news. It gets a lot of attention, but it's very unlikely that he would pay anything even close to that amount in what was a very strange court trial, I might add, with lots of anomalies. So, yeah, the BBC, like the US media, is just attacking anyone who's investigative and conflating it all into one big distrustful conspiracy culture that they can then turn around and try and cancel. And a lot more could be said, but I think those are the essentials for right now.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mark. Well, let's just finish off with a couple of comments. Something in the article which I found interesting was Marianna Spring was talking about this. It stated nearly 1 in 5 people in the UK think terror survivors are not telling the truth about what happened to them. New research for the BBC suggests a third say the pandemic has made them more suspicious of official explanations of UK terror attacks. So the UK public is waking up to something, but of course, Marianna Spring's line is that the UK public not really capable of understanding these difficult things itself. They're just being swayed by online trolls. She went on here, the survey of more than 4,000 people weighted to be representative of the UK population and carried out earlier this month by King's College London also suggests that 14% believe the 2017 Manchester Arena attack probably involved crisis actors who pretended to be injured.
That's quite an incredible statement. So again, we have the position that they take on one hand that people like Richard D. Hall are conspiracy theorists. Nobody really listens. It's a small niche audience and this kind of thing. And then the next hand, they're saying that, in fact, the reach of Richard D. Hall is 14% of the population. Which way does it go?
Well, of course, the BBC doesn't know because it's not coming from a truthful, factual basis. It's floundering around in its own propaganda. And let's just put a BBC report up screen to finish this segment so there's no misunderstandings. Back in June 2021, the BBC News said Manchester Arena inquiry, bomb victims were failed at every level, family says. 22 people murdered in the Manchester Arena bomb were failed at every level by organisations criticised in a public inquiry report. Bomber Salman Abedi should have been identified as a threat by security, the inquiry chairman said. Now, my point here is, of course, the BBC and Marianna Spring have not got digging into the failures here as to what was really happening. They're attacking anybody who dares to ask questions. So let's finish the segment and put the lovely Marianna Spring back up on screen. And we'd just like to say that Richard D. Hall has published a response to what he calls the BBC panorama propaganda. And you can find that written response if you go to the richplanet.net website. So we're under surveillance by the BBC. Any member of UK society who dares to challenge the government is going to find Marianna Spring on their case with Panorama. And yet we're supposedly fighting a war against the nasty Putin who's running a dictatorship. Well, it's not funny at all.